signs take on all kinds of different forms. They could be just billboards or neon signs or screens that are constantly showing a moving animation. Sometimes it's just some kind of an object. Like for instance right here. I'm going to come over here to this corner store at the far end of the painting and zoom in on this S right here. And we see that it's just this big piece of metal shaped into a letter S with a little inset area and so on. This is what we're going to create here, is this 3D S. So I have a new file here, and here I'm going to use a regular font. I've chosen Futura, condensed, 500 points, and I'm going to just type in the letter S right there, cap S. That's good. So now, it's straight on, and I'm not really going to work with this S. It's the basic shape that I want, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this type right here. There's the type. I got it selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over here and say Layer, Type, Create Work Path. And that's going to give me a path which we'll see right here in our paths. There's a work path, which I'm going to go ahead and save it by giving it a name, and we'll call it the letter S. So there's our font. So what I'm going to do is go over to my layers and throw that away. We don't need that anymore because we're going to create it all based on this path here. Now it's straight on, and we're down on street level looking up at this sign, which is above the entrance. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to distort this path so it has that look of 3D. Now, if you have a perspective grid, then you should use that at that point, but I'm just going to do it pretty much by eye. So I'm going to choose distort, and I'm going to kind of bend this guy up like this, and then bend it down like that. So now we're kind of looking up at this big giant S up above us. It's going to be a three-dimensional S. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the path and just move it straight over like that. So now I've got this side of the S right there. So now I'm going to have to go in there and create certain parts which are somewhat lost, like right here. See how it's breaking up there? So let's zoom in on that little area right there. And what I'm going to do is I'm simply going to take, with my direct selection tool, I'm going to take this last point and drag it right up to that edge and kind of open it up a little. There we go. So now it's just meeting right at the edge. And if it's not quite right, it won't be perfect. So we have to go in there and make sure we match it right up to that point right there. Now we can pull back and see how that looks. So just pull back, and that bottom looks fairly good, though it doesn't have enough of a curve. So we'll just go and bring this out just a little bit. There we have a nice match. Now up here, it's a little different because this is a hard edge right here. So what we need to do is to create that little shape as a separate path. So I'm going to go in there and let's get real close so we don't mess it up at all. We're going to click from this point right there down to this point, come up here and click and close. Now I want a little overlap here, so I'm just going to go a little beyond and come back. So that way it just bleeds into that area and I won't get any spaces showing up. So let's go over here and make sure that these corners match up perfectly. Just get it right in there. And let's come down here, and that corner, let's bring it down right in there like that. So it's looking good. All right, so now we have all the paths we need to now create our letter. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to start to colorize this. Now the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the basic path right here, which is my S, and I'm going to fill it with a gray color. Go in there and fill it with a nice kind of mid-gray like that in a layer. And I'm actually going to call this Frame Edge, and go ahead and fill that path. So now I've got the path still selected. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a different color here. Let's go with a lighter gray. Let's say that one right there. And I'm going to pick a paintbrush, and I'm going to get a hard edge brush like this. And I see the size I got. Let's make it a little smaller. Let's see what a 15 is going to look like. And I'll just test it out right here. There's the size. That looks pretty good, but still a little thick. So let's bring it down to, say, maybe 12. I always like to test by doing a little stroke next to things just to see how it's going to look. That looks good. So let's undo that. Now that we have that, I'm going to create a layer and call it Front Face, because that's going to be the edge of our letter, right around there. Okay, so now I'm going to go in here and stroke that layer with the paintbrush, that path. So there's the paintbrush, that path is selected, and I click stroke. So there we have this little stroke. Now, it looks a little light. And I just realized because our opacity is reduced. So let's bring that back up to 100% and stroke it again. There we go. Now we have that nice solid line. Now that we've done that, we see that our edges are going to be a little off. So when we look at that path again, let's go see the path. Now we see that the edges are a little off. So we're going to have to go in there and modify those right before we start to do our outer edge. But first, let's do the back end. So this has to be pretty much that same size going all the way around. That's going to look good. So I'm going to go in there and make up a layer. And we're going to call this the frame side. And I'm going to pick a much darker gray. Let's say we pick something like that. In that layer, we'll take that path and fill it. Now, it's going right up into the edges. That's looking good. Everything's looking really good there. So now here's that little space where we're going to have to go in there and modify this. So let's go up here to this box, right up in here and get close. And then we're going to take this one path and just kind of bring it right up to that edge and down to this edge. That's going to be that side. And that also added a little shortening. See, it's going to be a little taller here than it is in the back, giving us that sense of depth that we're missing everywhere else where we don't really see it because everything else is curved, whereas here we have a hard edge. So there we would see that foreshortening. And so now we have this dark gray. Let's go with a slightly lighter gray. And in the layer, we'll put it right here. We'll put it to frame top. In fact, we'll call it top edge. There we go. And we'll go ahead and fill that path with that color. So there, now we have all the basic shapes for our letter, right? Now we're going to start adding the real third dimension and making it look like a real sign. We have this layer right here, which is our basic letter, the frame edge. That's this guy right there. What I'm going to do, the reason I call that frame edge is because I'm going to create another layer. I'm going to copy this one. And I could either stroke the path again and so on, or I can do what I'm about to do. I'm going to just call this the letter face. And I'm going to lock the transparency, and I'm going to fill it with black. So I'll go in there and say, fill with the foreground color. Do it. There's the black. Now, this letter here, I'm going to clip with the frame edge. Now you're going to see why I called this the frame edge. I'm now going to take that letter and using my move tool and my cursor keys, I'm going to move it a little bit to the right and down a little bit. There's that edge of the frame that we're seeing where the letter is just coming in, and I'm going to move it down a little more. So it's a little further recessed, just like that. So now what we have to do is start adding the lighting that's going to make this look three-dimensional. Now, the street lights, they're down here. This is where all the lights are down below. So the light's going up. So all our highlights are going to be up in here, and then the dark tones will be the parts that are facing up there. So using my burn tool, which is going to give me my dark tones, I'm going to take my frame edge and just add a little darkness right into this area right in there. Let's set this up to mid-tones, and we get a little dark tones right in there, right in that area. Same thing right here. We're going to kind of darken this just a little bit, and we're going to get a much smaller brush and just kind of really darken that little edge because it's picking up the shadow of the frame itself right in there. Make it a little bigger, and we'll just kind of darken this just a little bit right in there. Pick up that little tonality, right? That's looking good. And maybe we'll just darken a little more right in there. So now we've got the highlights to do. So I'm going to go in there and select the dodge tool, and I'm going to add a little highlight right up in here. Let's set this up to our midtones again, and we'll add a little highlight right up in there. A little highlight right in there, just into that area, just like that, and that looks good. So now we're going to go to our frame side, where I'm going to add a little highlight right up into that area, right in there, and a little highlight under here, because that's picking up all that street light down below. Get my burn tool, and we're going to add some shadow to that. And again, I'm following pretty much directions of my light. I'm imagining how this light is working. I'm going to add a little dark tones right in there because it's just picking up that shadow right in there. It's the darkness of the sign itself. Then that little top face, we might want to go in there and just darken that. Wrong guy. We want that frame top edge right there. We'll just darken that a bit. There we go. So it's nice and dark in the shadows. So now the front face, that's that edge right there. I'm going to do stuff to that. But I want to do a lot of different things to it. So I'm going to do it in a separate layer, which I'm going to clip right there. I'm going to clip it with the front face. And this is going to be reflections. These are all these little highlights and stuff coming from the street, cars passing by and all that kind of thing. So I'm going to go in there and just paint them in. So I'm going to throw in some dark tones. So I got a nice, fairly soft brush. I'm going to soften it up a little bit. And I'm just going to add a streak right across. Click here and shift click down here. I got that strong tone going right across. So I can bring down the opacity. So let's just soften it up a little bit. And I might want to go in there and maybe add a smaller one right here, which I'll soften up even more. This one I'll soften up, and I'll just do it right through there. So I got another little highlight going through there, or rather a shadow or a reflection. And now with white, I'm going to add a couple of highlights. So I'm going to just click right here, right through there. Let's go into a totally new layer, and we'll just add a little highlight right through there, nice and strong, a little bit bigger, and we'll throw one right across here. Make that brush much smaller, and we'll just throw one right across that area there, which will clip with the sign as well. Bring down its opacity just to soften those, and we'll soften this one as well. And there we can see now we have all these nice little highlights going through the front face of our metal letter. And when you look at it closer, you see that we have all this nice 3D effects going through there that we made up ourselves. Let's just take that little frame edge, and I'm going to darken this a little more. Now that I see it, I just want to have a little more shadow in there and so on. Just a little more shadow on the sides as well. So it starts to have that three-dimensional look. And there you can see that we have our 3D metal letter that started from a real font, and we just manipulated it to the point where we have the effect that we wanted.